what we're going to talk about today is, this used to be called Recording Better Voiceovers. That was the very first time I did this at MAGFest because everybody was into voiceovers. Everybody wanted to be a voiceover actor or actress, and that was the thing, right? Well, now people still kind of want to do that, but they really want to be content creators. They want to stream on Twitch. They want to do the YouTube. They want to do all of the things, right? And I cannot tell you how much crap advice is on the internet that is just scary crap, like to the point of where someone will go, I'm testing this microphone and it's so wonderful. Meanwhile, so they're testing this microphone, but what you're hearing is the microphone that's out of frame. And you're not actually hearing this. And I watched one video where they did that, and the young lady turned, and I saw the lavalier microphone like peeking out of her blouse, and I was like, oh, really? Really? So you're faking a microphone review? Not to mention microphone reviews are pretty dumb, but it's okay. I'll probably do microphone reviews too, so I don't want to make so bad about it. Because that's the one thing I have a lot of, and I have a lot of microphones. So they should go to work here. But the first thing that we want to know, okay, is bad audio is terrible, right? I cannot tell you how hard it is to listen to a podcast or to listen to a YouTube video or anything where the audio is bad, right? But when the audio is good, no one cares. It's just fine, right? And so that really is what you're going for here. You're going for transparency and clarity. You're not going for other things, okay? So when you're thinking about how do I make good audio, the first thing is you want to try to sound as natural as possible, okay? A lot of stuff that I've researched and heard is you tend to have a lot of people out there who will enhance their voice. There are ways to do that, like the radio enhancement is when you do this. See, now I sound like a radio guy, and I've got a deep voice, but I really don't have a deep voice. And that's as much as it need to happen for me to have a deep voice and me not to have a deep voice. What's that? It's like 4.5 inches, right? Those are the kind of measurements you're talking about when you're working with microphone technique. You're talking about centimeters can change how something works, or going from here, talking like this, and then talking like this, and then talking like this, just a short movement, right? So it's super important to decide about certain factors, okay? One of them, let's get this one out of the way first, is what microphone should I buy, okay? So the first thing you have to consider is dynamic or condenser. The overwhelming majority of people are going to be using dynamic microphones. They're going to be using the Shure SM7B. That is what pretty much everybody uses, or they use the RE20. Okay, the Electrovox RE20. Occasionally they'll have some random dynamic mics that people are trying to sell you, but those are the two big boys. They're the ones that everybody uses. I know Neumann makes one. They make one dynamic mic, and it's got a green badge. That's all I know. And it looks like a little dirigible. It's very interesting looking, and it just sounds like an SM7B because that's what everybody in the radio industry uses. Okay. Now, the problem with dynamic microphones as opposed to condenser microphones, so the difference real quick, right? This is not a microphone lecture, so I won't go into the nitty gritty here, but a dynamic microphone uses electromagnetic induction. So what that means is it uses a magnet, right? It's a magnet in a coil, and I won't do a rude gesture, but the coil, here's the magnet and here's the coil, and it does this, and as it goes up and down, it creates electrical potential. And that then is a mimic of the audio, or a mimic of the sound pressure that's coming out of my mouth. I apologize for all the popping. So I'll move slightly off axis, and there won't be as much popping. Look at that. Don't even need a windscreen. So you have electromagnetic induction, and what's great about those is you can scream into them. You can use them as hammers. You can dip them in buckets of water. All of those things will not break them. It's very, very hard to break a dynamic microphone with the caveat of a ribbon microphone. Don't buy a ribbon microphone. Please don't. I know they look cool, and they're like the RCA thing, and everybody's like, oh, I look like a guy from the 40s. No, just don't, okay? They're expensive. And when they're not expensive, they suck. And you can break them by just going, and they're broken. So just don't buy them. They're not worthless. They're great. I have a student. His name's Dylan. He's not here, but he loves ribbon microphones, and he would be very angry. But you just can't. Just don't. Okay. Especially if you're a trumpet player. Okay. Here's a quick aside. I'm famous for my quick asides. So I did an album called Brasiliana with a Brazilian trumpet player named Nairon de Silva, and here we are recording it, and I'm being the producer, and I look up to him, I'm like, man, why are you so bright? Like, you sound terrible. Like, what's going on? And he's like, well, I've been trying to be brighter. I'm like, well, this is stupid. Like, don't, like, for what bright means, like, lots of clarity, and trumpets shouldn't be that way. They just don't sound good. And it turned out that he was practicing because some trumpet player told him what microphones to buy, right? Because they know what they're talking about. I'm a trumpet player too, but still, right? Some random trumpet player was like, oh no, all trumpet players use ribbon mics. Well, what ribbon mics do is they make everything dark. They roll everything off at the top end and everything is dark. So here he is practicing with a ribbon mic going, man, I'm so dark. I need to make myself brighter. And he's listening in headphones and he's making himself brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter until he gets where he wants. And then he goes out into the real world where we all aren't ribbon microphones. And we go, oh my God, this is terrible. What did you do? Right? So even owning, like if you're an instrumentalist out there, buying a microphone that has character, you have to know that it has that character because you could actually falsely create something. You may think you sound away when you don't. Okay? Recording, like what we do here, all of this stuff is fiction, right? It's an art, and art is fiction. That's what this is. So you have to remember that, like when someone says, oh, Taylor Swift uses a TLM 103. Well, that doesn't mean if you use it, you're going to sound like Taylor Swift, right? Okay. So the problem with dynamic microphones, they're great at being cheap and they're great at being indestructible, but you have to have a ton of gain, like a huge amount of gain, or they are unusable. And so you can buy SM7Bs that have these little things on the back called, what are they called? FET heads. And basically they're little amplifiers that plug in to the dynamic microphone so you can amplify it before it gets to the console or whatever you're using. The problem with that is, like for instance, this Allen and Heath Z24 is probably $4,000 maybe, I think, something like that, in that neighborhood-ish maybe. I don't know, you can look it up. But typically we're using cheaper gear, right? We're using Behringers or whatever, and they sound fine, right? The problem with cheap gear, and this goes with cheap microphones too, cheap gear have noise floor. They're noisy. They sound good up to a point. Like, think of it this way. They probably judge their preamps via, can I record a drum set with this? Because 90% of the time that's what people are doing. And so it's like, well, sure. You can record a drum set with it because it's so loud, it doesn't matter how loud it is, right? Well, then you go to do voiceover and you have a dynamic mic, so you have to crank the gain all the way up, and now you're talking to somebody like this, and all you hear in the background is because that's how loud a dynamic microphone has to be, okay? So a condenser microphone is different. It operates off of capacitors, and it's electrostatic induction, if you care. And like this is a dynamic microphone, okay? This is a Neumann KM81. This is actually a shotgun microphone, and I'll show you what that means. But this is actually a condenser. And so these are really sensitive. So you don't need as much gain. Thus, you can get by with crappier preamps. But do you see where I'm talking? Like, you could cheap out on the microphone, and then you're going to have to buy that. Or you can not cheap out on the microphone, and then you can buy the cheap preamp. But there's no way to get a cheap preamp and the cheap microphone and avoid that in the background, especially. Okay, let's just say you have a group of, 7 people who are all participating in a Twitch stream. So now think about that. You have 7 microphones that are all being fed into a bunch of preamps, 8 preamps that are all making noise, and all of those things are coming together in a mono stream. So one, not 2 speakers, just one. That's all you're getting. So what you've done is you've increased the noise floor, meaning the hiss, by 10. It's that loud to the point where it is completely and utterly audible. And there's very little you can do about that. So you have to balance it. You have to decide, where am I going to spend the money? What do I want to do with that? And one of those things is buying the microphone, right? So if you're stuck with a preamp that you can't really upgrade, then you might want to spring for a microphone that has a better noise. And if it's only one person, getting a cheaper condenser is okay. But as you start adding people, you're going to add more of that noise, right? So that's something that no one ever talks about. No one ever talks about noise floor and how hissing is bad, right? And when you're remote recording, or I should say, when you're on-site recording, like what I used to do with orchestras, it doesn't matter because the air conditioner is louder than the self noise, right? That's in the background, and it doesn't matter, right? But if you're in a quiet studio, even if you've got an air conditioner going on in the background, you still you really have to be careful of that self noise. So I recommend condenser microphones if you can, okay, if you can afford it. I mean, you can get a halfway decent condenser microphone for $400 or $500, right? An SM7B is going to cost you $300 at least, maybe even more, right? And getting microphones used, I understand that I get all of my microphones used in general, and I understand that's because I have I can fix it if it breaks, or I have a little bit more experience with it. But sometimes you can get pretty good deals for the people who really thought they wanted to stream, but then found out they didn't want to stream, and so they're getting rid of everything. So that's the type of microphone. Okay, there's only two types, dynamic and condenser. There isn't a third type called a ribbon. That's a dynamic microphone. And as far as large or small diaphragm microphones, doesn't matter for voice. Just really doesn't. Okay, so for what you all are doing, it doesn't matter. Okay, I recorded a piano singer album, and I used this microphone for the vocal because he insisted on playing while singing. And so I went Tiny Desk concert on him. This is what they use to record people in the Tiny Desk concerts. Well, not this particular one, but they use a shotgun, so it gets rid of the room noise. The next thing you have to look at is the directional response. So this is, how does this microphone pick up sound, right? So this microphone pick up sound right from everything picks up great from the front, but how does it do it from the side? That's called rejection. And when you're doing stuff that involves voiceovers and radio-esque kind of things, you want tons of rejection. That's like when you listen to the radio and the guy coughs or whatever, and he just turns away and it sounds like he's a million miles away coughing. He's not. He just went like that. But it's enough, right? Because of the directional response. Now, there is a problem with that, because if you like to dance while you're doing this, it gets really hard to hear, right? And that's kind of bad. So we'll talk about how we get rid of that later. But that's a problem, right? And that's why you'll watch, if you've ever watched, look at so who's the ubiquitous podcast? What, Joe Rogan? Okay, I don't care if you like him or not, whatever. But he has his stuff filmed, right? And he's like this. So how do you like this stuff? You really like it? It's good. He never moves his head ever. He stays right here, and that's all he does. And he talks like this, and that's because if he moves, you won't be able to hear him. And so that is his talent, right? If you ever watch really good vocalists don't move when they sing. I know that the video shows them that they move when they're singing, they're emoting, and they're like, yeah, and they're doing that stuff. No. When they're singing, they're correct posture, they're breathing, and they're singing, and they're going straight ahead, because if they move, it changes the way the microphone sounds. And we'll see that in a second. And that can be nightmare for your producer. So the way you determine what the directional pattern is a polar plot. Okay? And they are basically these big round plots. I'll show it to you in a second. And it shows you volume and direction. Okay, so the most common microphone that everybody uses, that you will see everywhere, that is terrible for this stuff, is a cardioid microphone. Okay? They call it a cardioid because it looks like a heart. Upside down heart. Okay? My students say it looks like a butt, but whatever. Okay? Whatever floats your boat. But notice on this, right? You have a lot of detection from the front, right? because it's like it says 0. It's up there, like it's right. It's perfect. And as you go around the microphone like this, as you go around the sides of the microphone, and this way too, 3D. As you do that, the volume falls off. And as you see, when you get to 90 degrees, it's at -5 decibels. So that means if you move, you will change your volume, but not drastically, like enough to know. So typically, as an aside, the smallest amount of volume change that a person can really perceive is 3 decibels. Now, if you're trained, you can hear anything. Like I can hear like 1/10 of a decibel if my eyes are closed. But normally, if you're passively listening, if someone just moves it a little bit or just whatever, you won't hear it. But as soon as someone moves it 3 dB, you go like that. Like it triggers a response. And so 5 dB is enough to do that, but it's not enough to really isolate from other things. However, when you're right behind this microphone, right, we're talking, -20 dB. That's significant. And that's why they're used a lot in the studio, because they can isolate instruments from one another. Like in a drum kit or whatever, you can isolate the instrument from reflections or whatever, and it makes everything sound very together, okay? And as an another side, if you ever do use a cardioid microphone for a voiceover or whatever, right, don't put the acoustic treatment behind the microphone, like everybody shows you with those stupid mic shields. Why would you do that? I mean, you can, but you're still going to get echo because it picks everything up from the front. And what's probably behind you? A wall that's reflecting all of your sound back into the microphone, obviously with a U-shaped shadow, but still it's there, right? So you actually want to be in front. So like if you wanted to really do something like do a closet recording, I would put you in the closet, right? Pointed out the door. And I put the microphone with maybe another thing around the microphone pointed at you in the closet. And that way, you're not picking up any reflections, right? So that if you wanted to do, instead of doing it the other way where they stick the microphone in the closet and then they like sing into the closet, then it sounds like I had a student once that told me, I bought one of these microphone things, the boxes, the porta box, and he goes, the problem is it sounds like a microphone in a box. And I was like, well, because it's a microphone in a box. That's what it sounds like. I mean, yes, you did it correctly. Congratulations. Well, I don't want it to sound like that. Well, then don't put it in the box, right? Then you've got to put you in the box. And obviously, it's too small for you, so you've got to figure something else out. But cardioids are what people use for vocals. That's why they're the most ubiquitous microphones out there, because vocals are pretty much the only thing that are recorded nowadays. I mean, yes, it does happen, but drums are MIDI, guitars are direct, and piano is MIDI, basses are MIDI. I mean, it's all MIDI. And now I just got on my feeds today that Apple for books, AI voices. So no more voice actors. They've got AI voices replacing all the books. We shake our heads, but I'm telling you, it's like right up there with chatbot, where all of a sudden you're like, who am I talking to? I'm talking to a computer. All right, so there you go. The next one that we want to look at is the hypercardioid. Now this is great. This is a hypercardioid. This is an SM58, well, or at least one that looks like an SM58. Nope, it's a Samson R21, which is a copy of an SM58. Okay, they're hypercardioids, and they're used on stage. They're great on stage for rock concerts because they eliminate the feedback from amplifiers. Well, they don't eliminate it, but they get rid of a lot of it, so you can make them louder. And they're great for radio. SM7B is a hypercardioid. Okay, we use them because they're highly directional. This is pretty significant of a volume drop as opposed to here. I mean, this is really directional. And so that makes it really good for voice, but you do have to stay relatively still, right? Which can be a problem. The last one is sort of a directional microphone. And this is typically, although I'm noticing nowadays that most shotgun microphones are actually hypercardioids. They're not the traditional shotgun microphone. And the reason is because the way a shotgun microphone, so this is a shotgun microphone, Okay, shotgun microphones are, the capsule of the microphone is down here, okay? And it has this, and this is called an interference tube. And what it does is it prevents this, there's a direct route through here to the capsule, but there is not a direct route from the sides, okay? And that's how you get that pattern. The problem is the shorter the tube, right? Because we want short tubes because they sit on our cameras, or some poor boom operator has to hold it above somebody for 12 hours, right? So they want them short and light. Well, the problem is it makes it less like that. In order to have that pattern, this tube has to be this long. And I wanted to bring mine. I have an old Sony C74 that's this long, but it won't fit in my bag. It's just too long, and that's the microphone they use for the lightsabers. So they actually swung those microphones in front of speakers, and because the feedback didn't happen until the tip went across the speaker, and it was so, saber-like that it would go vroom, 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 like that's feedback you're listening to. You can't do that so much with the short ones, but it's hard to find the big ones now because, again, nobody they used to pay some poor guy to hold it up. That was what the grip was, right? And he just had to sit there, until they were done talking. Now, this is more forgiving because it's more like a hypercardioid. So you could put this here and still move a little bit and be okay. With those other ones, you had to stay really still. But this is the type of microphone that most people use on YouTube. They use shotgun microphones, unless they're doing the whole, I'm a radio host and I'm going to sit here and talk with the microphone in front of my face. Although some of them, the microphone's pointed down here and they still sound like it's right there. So probably there is another microphone sitting above them, right, out of frame. Remember, it's all mystery and magical tour here, right? Everything is about, nothing is real. Exactly. So the next thing that we need to look at is frequency response. Okay, so this is how the microphone hears you. That is done with a frequency plot. Tons and tons and tons of microphones that are made today, including this one, are what I would consider bright microphones. They have what is now teamed the vocal lift, but it's basically, and I'll show you here. Here's your favorite SM7B. So what this basically says is that when you flip it to the, hey, I'm a vocalist in a radio station setting, and if you haven't seen a SM7B, there are switches on the back that you can flip. But you see that dotted line up at the top of the frequency spectrum? Small dots. See how right around 10K, a little lower than 10K, somewhere like 3 to 10, there's this boost. And that is where all of sibilance lies. It lies there. And it makes things sound clear. So people like it. And so when a vocalist sings into a TLM 103 or a U87 or whatever the vocalists sing into nowadays, they will have boosts like that. Because that's what everybody likes. It makes voices sound more exciting, okay? When I was a kid, I tended not to have that kind of stuff, so I tended to use flat microphones. And this is an example of a flat microphone, okay? Hold on a sec. Okay, so this is a CAD E100. This is from the 1980s. Do not buy the new CAD E100. It is terrible. Okay, you have to get the one with the round badge. They tend to be cheap. Okay, they're weird. You have to power them. They're they use phantom power, but they also have a battery, and you have to make sure that you have at least plugged it in at some point for it to work, even though it's weird, but it's just how it works. You could turn it off. I don't know, whatever. But there it is. This used to be really cheap and I'm going to claim total credit for this, until I did one of my other panels and they went up by $200. But it's probably not me, but whatever. I still like to claim credit. This microphone is a hypercardioid, which is very, very weird to have a hypercardioid that is what is called a side address microphone. You address it from the front. This is a front address microphone. It's from there. side address is from the side, right? So top, side. It's very odd to have a side address microphone that's a hypercardioid. It just is. And I like this one because it's flat. It's just utterly flat. So it makes people like me who have a really bright voice, it makes me sound better. But it might make somebody who has a really dull voice sound worse. And that's where we get into the why do we choose the frequency response we choose? It depends on you. And unfortunately, in this day and age, it's really hard to try microphones out. Back when I started all of this, you could call Sweetwater up, they'd send you 12 microphones, and you could try them out and send them back. Now they're like, no, thank you. You have to keep those, right? So you kind of have to mess around. And in general, brighter microphones can be fixed, but I tend to lean more on the flatter microphones because you could make them brighter with little effort, as opposed to a really bright microphone that might not be as good. So you can see like this is a Sony ECM 6. This is another shotgun microphone. It's not this one. I thought it was this one until I looked at the label. And this one is actually the 678, which is the flat version, of course, because that's the one I would have bought. But again, like they have this huge present boost. So there might be a problem with this, right? Like if you're outside, that's like where wind lies, right? And if there's wind, it's going to be like, oh my God, and it's going to make things worse. However, if you're inside and you've got a dull sounding voice, this may be the ticket for you, right? So that's something you have to judge. Bright voices, maybe flatter microphones. I always tend to go with flatter ones because they're more versatile. So if you did wanted to do something else, then it would be fine. But that's just something to think about, okay? Now, almost there. Don't fall asleep. Almost there. Promise. Now here comes the production parts. This is so you've learned what microphone to pick up, right? I didn't talk about microphone preamps because you're doing voice, so it'll probably be okay. Unless you do a lot of them, then I would invest in the most expensive preamp that you can. Don't buy any of the fancy ones, right? Don't buy a Neve preamp. You don't need a Neve preamp, okay? That stuff is just weird. It's for people who are bored of transparent, and so they buy the stuff that's not. Just so you know, like everybody was trying to be better than Neve, and then we got better than Neve, and then everybody was like, wow, I really wish I sounded like I was on a Neve again, and they went back that way, right? It's like SSL. SSL was a console that was better than a Neve because it was transparent or more transparent. And now everybody's like, oh no, I want to get all of the crap to make things sound really, really dark and nasty and harmonic-y and stuff, right? You can do that later. Don't do it now. Just buy cheap, not super cheap, but like a mid-range preamp that you can use at a moderate level that won't be too noisy, okay? Focusrites are super popular. I don't particularly care for them. They're a little on the noisy side. I would, but they're pretty good. Mo2s are good. Tascam, of all things, are good. Mo2s are actually really good. So you just, pick something that's in your budget and just try to stay away from the super cheap stuff. Unfortunately, you really can't cut a whole lot of corners. Like you don't have to go super expensive. Like you don't have to buy, like a Sennheiser MKH 8060 that costs $2,000. That won't matter. But you're not going to be able to buy a CAD, like a CAD E100 from now that costs like $55. They're terrible. They sound like awful. They're one of the worst things ever made. So be careful. Now, production is important. So there's some things that you're going to need, okay? And they're all plugins because you're going to do this all in the computer. Don't buy things that are outside of the computer, okay? Not unless you just really want to, or you have, like, you're really positive you're never going to leave the spot that you're in, okay? It's just not worth it. Just buy a plugin, okay? So the first plugin you're going to need is an equalizer. By the way, every DAW, or digital audio workstation, comes with all of these. There is no need to buy any. They're there. If you use Logic, it'll work. If you use Reaper, it'll work. If you use Pro Tools, it'll work, okay? I'm assuming if you use Adobe Audition, it'll work. I don't know. I've never used it, but I'm sure it's there, okay? So you'll need an equalizer, and this is mainly to do two things. And I usually do use 2 separate equalizers to do this. The first thing is to get rid of the proximity effect. I hate it. Now, maybe you like it. I hate it. All right? This doesn't sound real. It doesn't, and it's annoying. And when things don't sound real, it distracts people. And what is distracting? Bad audio. You want it to sound real, okay? Or better than real, but still real, right? So you're gonna wanna roll off, and I'll show you when we get to the demonstration, you're gonna take out a bunch of the low end. So if you're a dude and have a deep voice, you can get away with like from 125 hertz down. You don't need, because nothing you do exists down there. If you're a lady who has a higher pitched voice, those you can go a little higher, like maybe 140 or 150 hertz. And what I do is I just take a filter and I move it until I hear that the audio changed. Like it stopped sounding real. Like it doesn't sound real, right? It doesn't sound real. And then it's real. And then I go all the way up and then like, oh, not real. And then we come back. And then I just leave it there. Okay, it's called high passing. What you're doing is you're passing the high frequencies. You're eliminating the low frequencies. Even when I mix, I high pass every instrument when I mix, because frankly, there is nothing below 40 hertz that is good. Nothing. I don't care. There just isn't. Even in dubstep, there's nothing below 40 hertz that is good. It's all just, it doesn't make any sense, right? Just get rid of it. Oh, come on. I grew up with that stuff. Give me a break. All right, then you need a compressor. Okay, so if any of you has been to my compressor lecture at MAGFest or anywhere else, compressors make loud things soft. That's all they do. They're not magic. They don't give you tone. They don't make your attacks sound better. None of that stuff is true. They make loud things soft, okay? They alter the envelope of an instrument. And so what that means, an envelope is something it's an attack, a decay, a sustain, and a release. Everything has one, okay? Organs don't have an attack. They just have a sustain, right? They don't have a decay either. Pianos have a whole bunch of attack, and unless you hit the sustain pedal, they have no sustain, right? A trumpet player has an attack, a decay, a sustain until they run out of breath, and then a release, right? So compressors alter loud things and they make them softer. So you can actually go in and sort of tailor that envelope by surgically determining what the compressor is making softer, right? But in far as voice goes, what we use the compressor to do is to prevent this, to prevent the movement from being distracting, because everybody moves, right? When, like, if you were listening to this in a room that wasn't necessarily like this, just slight movements would change how my voice sounded, right? And so we would need to compress my voice so that my movement doesn't distract. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm taking basically the on-access sound, making it as soft as the off-access sound, and now it's all the same. Now the problem with compressors is if you go too far, right, if you do more than like 3 decibels, people are gonna hear it, right, because it'll distract them, and we don't wanna distract them, that's bad audio. So you end up having to go in and just tailoring it so that the person sounds just like a block of sound, but it's not so much crushed, okay? Because that's not what we're into. You can use them for effects, that's for another lecture. But right now, in voice, this is what we're gonna use. The next thing you're gonna use is another kind of compressor, and this compressor actually makes softer things softer. It's called a gate. I couldn't find a picture of a gate, so I did that one. So it's a gate, right? And what gates do is when they turn on, when a gate opens, or I should say when the gate closes, which means it's on, it's active, it eliminates everything below a certain threshold. So conveniently, we call these noise gates. And what that does is when you stop talking, all of the noise goes away. And then when you start talking again, it transparently opens up, or naturally opens up so no one hears it, and it sounds good. A lot of people use these for their YouTube videos, right? They're not in soundproofed studios. They don't have good acoustic treatment, and it's really echoey. And so they use noise gates to try to get rid of some of that echo. And you've got to play a balance, right? Your compressor is going to make things soft or make things loud, things soft, so it's even, and that will then allow the gate to function better, because then it won't be catching things that are too soft, and you just play with it until it works out right. Now, that also means that you can't do a whole lot of screaming. Then people will know you're being compressed if you scream a lot or if you do randomly loud things. You can do it and it's fine, but just be aware that there is no perfect solution to that unless you've got like someone sitting at the board and they know exactly what they're, exactly when you're going to do it and they can mix it in. So that's just something you have to be careful with. But these are sort of a set and forget feel. Next. Acoustic treatment. Yes, you do need it. Don't get the foam. It doesn't work. Don't put piano blankets up. It doesn't work. Okay? Because what you're trying to get rid of is not high frequencies. You're trying to get rid of low frequencies. So you need to make bass traps. I recommend buying bass traps because unless you are a handyman woodworker and have wood, and which has been hard to find lately, Corning 703 insulation to make it yourself, it's just a lot. Like if you're building a whole studio and you're going to outfit everything, then yeah, go right ahead. Buy yourself a table saw, do all the stuff, and it's probably worth it. But if you're just like going to get three, just, GIK Acoustics, I'm not affiliated or anything. That's just who I use. There's a guy named Ethan Werner who's all over Gear Space and some of the acoustic things. He really likes cats. If you look him up on YouTube, he's always got like a cat. He has a company and they make fine stuff. Most stuff is good, but just get a bass trap, okay? The other thing is, though, is make sure that you cover, if you do make it yourself. So there's a studio, and it'll remain unnamed, that I saw a picture of because I had a student who wanted to work there, and their entire room is covered in these bass traps that no one put a covering on. Yeah, so that stuff, that 703 is fiberglass, which means if you go in there and breathe, you're going to get asbestosis. So yeah, put the covering on it. That's what it's there for. And then finally, this is my favorite, okay? I looked far and wide for this. You need a pop filter. Now, why is this my favorite? After being in this lecture, I don't want anybody to spend $50 on what is pantyhose. Okay, this is a fancy one. I went to Joann Fabrics and I bought a embroidery ring. And then I asked my wife for not used pantyhose and I covered it. And then I had a broken mic thing, and so I put that on there. But like, this is more like it. Here's one with just foam that I found lying around the house. Okay, there you go. See, this works really well. It's a pretty good pop filter. Pop, 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 pop. See, there you go. Pantyhose. It's cheap. And I wanted to show everybody that not only is it cheap, but Bruce Springsteen sings into it in front of a microphone that's worth more than your house, okay? And just so you know, that is, what it is stretched over is a coat hanger. And then they gaff taped it to the microphone. This is how people do it. Okay? Like, until the advent of YouTube, no one in a serious recording studio paid money for pop filters. They just didn't. Because you would just you'd go to Walmart, you'd buy it has to be queen size pantyhose, which just, you have to know where it is or it's awkward asking, but you got to get queen size pantyhose. And you use the leg and you create a little loop and then you go whoop, right up the leg, gaff it, stick it there, you're good. And then, if someone gets sick, you can just cut it off and get another leg, and there you go. It's fine. So just use pantyhose, okay? It's obviously, if this is for like a YouTube channel, buy a pretty embroidery ring, and then like maybe buy the black pantyhose. I think there's black pantyhose. I don't know. Like buy something that's a different color, right? And then or spray paint, do something, and it'll look cool. It'll be fine. No one will know, and everybody will think that it's the coolest thing ever. And they'll be like, where'd you get that? And then you can sell it on Etsy for $50. But I just wanted to show you that because like no one believes me. I would say these things, oh no, they buy those things. And I was like, so I'm like searching through YouTube to try it because I knew the We Are the World thing. Like you've got Michael Jackson singing in front of a C12 microphone, which is incredibly expensive, and there's pantyhose in front of it. That's what it was. So there you go. I just like the look of Bruce Springsteen's face in that, so. If you've ever watched We Are the World, it's of the 80s. It's fantastic in the sense, not in the sense of what it actually did, but because we can argue about that. But every person in there had a personality, right? And they had to sing that way. So Kenny Rogers sounded like Kenny Rogers, and Bruce Springsteen. I don't know if he normally looks like that and he talks to people, probably not. But like they all had their persona, and when they had to sing their line, it was the persona. So it's neat to watch. The next thing is, please use a bloody take sheet, okay? When you're making content for your videos, or obviously if this is a live Twitch stream, you won't have a take sheet. But if you're making stuff, use a take sheet, okay? What take sheets are is you get to document what was good and what didn't work. That way, you don't have to sit through 8 hours of footage to find out that you messed up the third word of whatever and have to go do it again. You can remember and you can knock it off. So here you've got very good for VG, good, and then you have bad take, not sure, false start. It used to be an NG for no good, but then people got mad at me when it was like, why are these NGs? So I just put X's on them instead now. But it used to be VG, G, and NG. And if you got an NG, that's no good, right? Or FS, false start. That means you were like, hey, and well, oh man, I forgot what I was gonna say. That's a false start, okay? Just make one. I made it on numbers or whatever. But that way you can go through line by line or whatever, scene by scene, and you can really pay attention, okay? Last thing, before we actually do some cool stuff, find a producer, okay? I know no one wants to hear this, but I'm gonna tell you what you don't want to hear. If you're the talent, you can't be the engineer, okay? Well, you can. I won't say that. Yes, you can, whatever, okay? But not really, right? And I've learned this because I am a performer. All right, I am a trumpet player, and I have performed many recitals. And there was one time where I tried to record my own recital, and it was the most awful thing ever because my brain couldn't be in one spot or the other, right? It was either, am I the talent or am I the producer? Am I trying to figure out where the mics are in the right spot, or am I trying to, figure out how to play my notes right? Okay, same thing with this. If you're gonna do the videos, get one of your friends to be the producer, right? You don't have to pay them, like buy them a pizza or something. I mean, and when you get rich, like the people on the Twitch streams, like in panel 2, when you can buy houses off your Twitch stream, then, hire a producer. Like you don't think that these people who have great podcasts, you don't think that they're sitting in their basement editing their podcast, do you? No, they hired someone to do that. In fact, there's a person sitting in the room with them, and they're sitting there going, no, don't do that. Talk about the other thing, right? Like they've got headphones on, and they're talking to them, telling, don't forget, talk about the thing that you said you were going to talk about, and then they do it, right? So have a producer because it makes life easier, or at least plan for it, and then they can have the take sheet. So when I do my stuff that's coming up, that I've made the New Year's resolution to do it, I'm going to hire a producer because I don't want to be speaking into a video and go, God, I wonder if I look okay, or God, am I in focus? I don't know if I'm in focus, right? I want someone else to be looking at a monitor and say, okay, everything's fine. That was really good. Do that again. We need to do this again, and then work it that way. You can do all the editing yourself and all that, but just get someone there to help you out. Okay? So we have a couple things here. Is Legend of Avantris in the... Yes, you are. Come here. Okay, so this is... introduce yourself here. You're supposed to...
Just talking to this. Hi, I am Mikey Gilder from Legends of Avantris. We're a Dungeons & Dragons stream. You may not have heard of us. If you've heard of Chuckles the Clown on TikTok and Shorts, that's also us. It's the same thing. So, hello. I'm happy to be here. John, thanks for inviting us up here.
Video, and I'm sorry, but I'm off camera and off everything. Okay, so I'm still off. I'm sort of on camera. Okay, so we're going to use this. And what we're going to try to do, right, because this is live TV now, so you never know what happens on live TV. All right, so what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to just record something, and then we're going to just work on it, okay, in live and see it, right? So we're going to use this shotgun microphone mainly because we're in a big room with a library of computers and all sorts of stuff, right? So microphone cable, shotgun microphone. This is a Sony 678. They're relatively cheap online, or at least they were. And a really cheap microphone. This is by the way, a lighting stand. Lighting stands are fantastic microphone stands. They're so light. I carry them everywhere. They're great. And we have a shock mount. I didn't talk about shock mounts. They're sort of important. Especially if you're going to bang on things. But in general, they just hold microphones. These kind of microphones, like the SM58s, have shock mounts built in. So do the SM7Bs. They're built in, so you don't have to worry about it. So we're just going to record him talking about something. You can talk about anything. I don't really care. And nothing profane, I guess, because this is a children's panel. This is a Mag Scouts panel, so no weird stuff. Yeah. Okay. So one of the things about placement, okay, so if you're going to be doing this in a podcast or not, in a podcast form, right, or if you're going to be using some video, it's obviously going to be above and out of frame. So what we're going to do is we're going to mimic above and out of frame because I can't make it, he's so tall. And so I can't, and I don't have a boom arm because I couldn't fit it in my bag. So we'll pretend that it's below frame. See, there we go. This is called field expediency. All right, so. Well, that's true, but we're going to do this. But thank you. That was good. That was a very good suggestion. I apologize. Okay, so what we're doing is this sort of out of frame, but you would basically be doing this above his head. Right, and this is a shotgun microphone, so it hopefully will get rid of a lot of stuff. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to do this because we're smart. Go there. Yes, sir. Because that's the door, and if we were pointing at the door, then we would get door, and so we're trying not to do that. So now we're using the null spots against our noise. Right, I could shut the door, but we're not going to do that. So. Because we wouldn't want that. We want everybody to see what they're missing. All right, so we're gonna see about this. You don't have to worry about proximity effect on a shotgun microphone because you can't get close to it. Remember, the capsule's way down here. You're already too far away, so you could be right up on that mic, and it would be okay. I don't, but yes, you can. Right. In general, though, because we're going. Being silly aside, we're going for. Trying to mimic what it would sound like in a studio, right? And of course, that would be out of frame. So it's going to have to be somewhat further away from the voice. This is what a lot of people do when they're doing overdubs for movies. They get the microphone that was in the place that was recording the audio, they stick it in front of the talent, and then they sing, they talk or do their lines that way, right? So what we're running into is a Zoom F6. That is a field recorder. It's going to be my preamp today. And then we're just going to go into Reaper because why not? And we're just going to record something. And then we're going to play with that and use the different techniques that we talked about. All right, so hold on a second. Let's make sure this all works. Of course, Pro Tools quit unexpectedly, because that's what it always does.
I just stood right next to it, and it quit unexpectedly.
No, not Adobe Acrobat. I didn't say that. Oh. No, it's on. Audio device.
Check.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. here is my screen. This is Reaper. Turn the microphone on. So this is a condenser microphone, so it does require phantom power. Go ahead and talk into it for me.
Hello. This is
'cause it's not.
check 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2.
Because I was smart.
Go ahead and sing that B or 20 blues.
If I could start singing, you don't want me
That
to.
one.
Certainly not. Am I just doing like audiobook? I'm doing character. What's my inspiration director?
Someone give him an inspiration. I'm not the director. Okay, that's fine.
Movie trailer voice on the brink of hysteria, like he's so sad. Something really bad happened right now.
All right, so unfortunately you can't see this, but I'm trying to get the. All right, go ahead and do that once. That's fine.
Seeing the kids, the dog, my house.
The question is, do you miss the dog? All right.
I'm gonna do my Chris Pratt Mario voice. Hello, it's me, Mario. It's me, Mario. Let's go. I love the meatball. I love the pasta.
All right. Okay, here we go. So you're gonna do hello, it's me, Mario.
Hello, it's me, Chris Pratt as Mario.
There you go.
I
Okay.
am from Brooklyn. It's a me, Save the Princess.
Okay, good. All right. All right, let's talk first. So I'm in Reaper. I've made a track. You can learn about this tomorrow, right? We won't talk about it right now, but made a track. This is feeding the computer. We'll also be able to hear it because it's feeding an input on the mixer. We're recording it. You can hear me. You can actually see me, but you can see how low it is. It's down at -42, which means we're getting a lot of rejection, even though I'm amplified, right? So it's pretty good. So we're going to record it. We're going to see it. Let's do, I don't know, vamp for like 60 seconds.
60 seconds.
Okay. By the way, if you're a voiceover actor or actress, you must learn how to hit your spots, right? Like if they say you've got 30 seconds, that means you have 30 seconds. You don't have 31, you don't have 29 and a half, you have 30. And if you've ever watched someone do like a sports analysis thing or any kind of thing on a radio show and they've got like an analysis, they're like, okay, well, we're about to go to break. What else do you have to say? And then they go like this. Well, I really think that this is like this. And they talk and they go, and as soon as they're done, it's like, well, and thank you. And it's commercial and it's perfect, right? So they've gotten used to that. So, all right. So we're going to have a Chris Pratt Mario for 60 seconds.
Chris Pratt Mario.
Oh, you could do that.
No, we're gonna do Chris Pratt Mario.
Okay. All right, hold on. Yeah. And let me mute my mic.
The world has changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much of that once was lost. None now live who will remember it. It began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest and fairest of all of the beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 were gifted to the race of men, who above all else desire power. For within these rings was bound a strength, the will to govern each race. But they were all of them deceived. For another ring was made, deep in the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom. The dark Lord Sauron forged a master ring, and into this ring he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. One ring to rule them all. One by one, the free lands of Middle-earth, tell me when to stop, fell to the power of the ring. But there were some who resisted. A last alliance of men and elves. I am from Brooklyn, remember. I am Mario the plumber, remember. Against the armies of a Mordor, and on the very slopes of a Mount of Doom, they fought for the freedom of Middle-earth. A victory was near, but the power of the ring could not be undone. It was in this moment, when all hope had faded, that Isildur... Thank you.
Okay, so this is what happens when you come to my panels. We have no idea what's going to happen, and that just happened. So there you go. Hopefully we won't get sued by either Nintendo or the Lord of the Rings, I guess Amazon. If Amazon calls MAGFest, I'm really sorry, Tom. So there you go. So here's our audio. All right, and so as you can see, hold on. Aha. By the way, you're obliged, if you're an audio professional, to use a trackball. So if you don't know how to use one, buy one and learn how to use it. Okay, so the reason is because you're usually sitting on a console and you don't have the room to actually use a mouse. So you just use a trackball, which of course is like so 1996, but it's I'm sure it's the only reason why they're made. Okay, so let's see if we're getting audio. So if I hit play.
Elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 were gifted to the race of men, who above all else desire power.
Okay, so notice what you were hearing, right? You were hearing already it sounds pretty close to his voice. Like it sounds pretty close. And so for me, I might not do a whole lot else, but I'm going to show you anyway, but it's close, right? At least from what I can hear from being behind a speaker. Okay. But what you do hear is you hear how his voice jumps out at you, but then comes backwards. That is a volume issue. Okay. That is where dynamic processing comes in. So listen again.
Elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners.
You hear how it leans in and leans out, leans in and leans out. Okay. So what we want to do to fix that, or to at least moderate it, okay, is we're going to probably have to compress it. So now the first thing that everybody asks me now is like, well, what order you do it in? Do you compress it first and then EQ it, or what? It doesn't matter, right? Whatever jumps out at you first is probably what you should do first. Also remember, however, that as you add processing to a voice, it changes what it sounds like. And so you may do something that you need to change. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
When I record, like a lot of times, like you'll have it where, let's say, as an artist or as a voice person, you already have a comfortable preset that you feel good with, so you deal with getting through with the voice back. What I end up doing is I record simultaneously, so I record one with all the effects, and I record another one that's just dry, there's nothing on there, so if I did make a mistake, I would do that. How do you feel about doing things like that?
Oh, you can do that. Totally. Like, where's your preset coming from, though? Right, but it's a stack in the DAW, right? So just so you know, what are you recording in? Okay, I'm not super sure about this in FL, but probably your effects are coming after the recorder, and this is again something that we can talk about in the repurposing. But the edit window is like a tape recorder, and the effects don't happen until it gets to the mixer side of the DAW. So really, you're already recording a dry track. You don't need to record the other one. You already have it. And so all you have to do is disable your plugins and it would be dry. And that way you could, so you're not actually printing the plugins necessarily while you're recording. That's why I really like using DAWs, because some professionals will use outboard gear, and then you would be printing that, right? Because you're feeding your DAW with the outboard gear. But I think what you're doing now, and again, I could be wrong with FL Studio because they may have switched up where the plugins are, but usually it records into the edit window. That edit window feeds the top of the mixer, which is where your plugins sit. So you've already got a dry track. All you have to do, you could like just duplicate the track and disable the plugins and you're good. Like you wouldn't actually have to record both. But yes, totally. If you want to set up a preset, go right ahead. I'm not a big fan of printing the presets because what happens if you like change your mind, right? That happens. But some people do. Like if they're all set up and ready to go and they're using outboard gear, they'll just do it, right? And but for me, I don't know. I like to have options, so I don't like to do that. But with plugins, you have those options because they're there. You can turn them off, you can turn them on, you can change them, you can do whatever you want, and it's always there. So yeah, absolutely. Have a preset that you're comfortable with. And that's another thing. That's actually a really good point because sometimes you can get to a point where you actually can work the compressor. So you can know how far you can push it because you're monitoring yourself in your headphones. And so if you've got a compressor set like really and you're really used to it, you know how loud you can get, you know where you can point yourself, you can do all of that. So it's interesting. So real quick, so you can get more questions. Running a little behind. I'm going to go to my effects here. And let's just grab some effects. And I'm not going to use Reaper plugins just because I'm faster using other plugins, but this is in no way a I'm not like shilling these things. I hate that. So I'm not shilling things. Okay. So what we have here, and this is an EQ. Okay, so what I'll probably do with this, and I can't hear very well. I do have headphones, but I'd rather be open. But I'm going to put I'm going to high pass this. So this is what I mean by high passing. Okay, so when I play.
El, immortal, the wisest and fairest of all of the seven, and craft of the amount.
Yeah, right? Because this is, well, I should probably also turn these things off. But
elves, immortal, a wisest,
so
and fair.
I've made it worse, right? Of course, no one's going to put it up there unless you're trying to make a radio sound. And so I'm going to put it down like to 125 hertz. Don't worry about the Q and all that other crap.
Elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the beings. Seven to the dwarf lords, great miners, and crafts.
There's a slight difference, right? One had a little bit more heft to it, right? But it wasn't real heft. Now, if that really bothered you and you wanted less, you could go down to like 110 hertz or 100 hertz or whatever. But what we are removing is removing any rumble that might be coming from out there or in your studio or in your air conditioner, right? Air conditioner doesn't just go. Sometimes it goes like you hear that low rumble, right? And a lot of consoles, like this console right here, has a low high pass switch that's at 80 hertz that you just click on. And you're like, there it is. And you could print that if you wanted. Now, one of the other things that we might do is if we find that it's a little too strident, is we might use a de-esser, which is another kind of compressor. But we'll look at that maybe here. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do, so this was the EQ. All I did was mess around with this. If you have something that's boxy sounding, you can come in to around like 400, 500 hertz and just do that.
Elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the beings.
That was a little different. It's hard for me to hear, but I think it was. And then maybe we want to come in and if we wanted to make it sound like a ribbon microphone, you could come in and do this.
Elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the beings.
You how dull it got because I rolled off all the high end. Okay. The other thing that you really, really need to do when you're doing this is you need to be moving small amounts, okay, tiny amounts, and you need to try to do it with your eyes closed once you've set it up. The reason being is because Anybody who's in here and who's worked on this, you'll have to admit, I'll raise my hand. You've done all sorts of stuff and said, man, this sounds great, and then realized it was all bypassed and none of it was actually happening. Okay, it happens. It's like your brain, your eyes tell your brain what to hear. So you really got to close your eyes. You've got to make sure it's doing what you want. And you have to be very careful of doing things like this. How do I delete this? Delete. Okay, so watch what happens. So I can actually monitor.
Elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all the beings. Seven to the dwarf lords.
Okay,
Great
if you do that for too long, you'll start to miss the brightness. And you go, wow, this doesn't sound as good as it did before, even though it did sound fine before. And that's because we can get used to anything. Right? So you got to be careful. The other thing is louder is always better. We always think the louder thing is better. So when you're doing stuff like compression, we have to be careful because when you start making things louder, you're going to go, oh, that sounds better, when it might not. So we have to do what is called, well, I don't know. I call it gain matching. So as I do the compression, I'm going to make sure when I turn it off and on that it's the same volume. And I'll ask you guys to do that. So here's the compressor. I'm not here to teach how to use a compressor, but I can. If you contact me, I'll teach you how to do it. We have a threshold, we have a ratio, an attack, and a release, and I turn auto gain off. Okay, so what threshold is when is it going to happen? The ratio is how much is going to happen, and the attack is how fast it is going to happen, and the release is how fast it's going to stop. Okay, that's how simple it is. So what I'm going to do is, for voice, I tend to like old sounding stuff. Okay, old sounding stuff used to use LEDs. They weren't LEDs, they were lamps, right? They were called optical compressors. So basically what would happen is the signal, which is electric now, right, because it's been turned into electricity, would feed a light bulb, and as it got louder, the light bulb would get brighter. And then there was a photo diode or resistor or something that would pick that up, and it would lower the voltage, would lower the current, whatever it was. And that's how it did. So the brighter the bulb got, the softer it got. And it had a certain way of doing things, a certain speed. They are called optical compressors. So as you see here, I've chosen opto, and I'm going to choose 10 to 1 because that is sort of the max. Never go above 10 to 1 because it doesn't really sound any different. Okay? But typical opto compressors were 10 to 1. And then I'm going to use this threshold to determine what I am going to be cutting. Now, these plugins are kind of nice because you'll be able to see it happen. And you can actually turn this headphone on and we'll hear what is being altered.
elf, mortal, the wisest and fairest of all of the beings. Seven to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain called. And nine.
So those are all of the things that are being
Above all
adjusted.
Dire power. For within of these rings was elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the beings.
Okay, now let me turn that off. Let me find a little bit earlier because you guys start to laugh. Oh, that was pretty close. All right, let's go here. I'm going to turn it off and listen to it.
Gan with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves.
Listen to 3 were given to the elves.
Gan with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves.
Okay, listen for 3 again.
Gan with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves. Gan with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves.
So do you hear that when the compressor is on, 3 doesn't sound arguably softer than anything else. But when it was off, it was like, and the ring, blah, 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 3, right? 3 was really soft. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to match the volume. I'm trying to get the loud stuff to be soft, and I'm trying to not touch the soft stuff. Okay? Because I want the soft stuff. That's the level, right? And so I'm just bringing the loud stuff down close to it so it's not as noticeable. Remember the 3 dB thing? I tend not to compress more than like 4 decibels at a time. You'll see here, if you can see the meter, it's really hard to see. But
Gan with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the...
So a wisest right here, that went up to -3. But like if I really crank this up, this is what it sounds like.
Began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves.
That's called overcompressing something, because I could make that louder, right? So it would sound like this just sounds soft, right? But if you listen to the quality, do you hear how it's like crunchy?
Began with the forging of the great rings.
Right? It's terrible. So we're going to undo that.
Began with the forging of the great rings.
So there we go. So now we have the compressor. And then we go to the gate. Now this gate is going to turn things off and on. All right? So we're going to...
Began with the forging of the great rings.
All right? See how what's happening now is when it doesn't go beyond the threshold, it turns it off. So I've got to make it softer. So what we got to do is we've got to come in here and say, okay, well, let's see.
Began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the beings.
All right, that's quick and dirty. Now that would need to be tweaked some more, but I want to get some questions in. But like that would be the next part. And then maybe you have a de-esser. De-essers are compressors that work on frequency bands. And this would be to get rid of some of his S's. You kind of hear that stuff.
A wisest and fairest of all of the beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen.
Actually don't mind without it. And then finally, you can use a limiter. And what limiters allow you to do is it allows you to just say, okay, I'm going to make sure that this doesn't clip. So like if you were doing this on a podcast, you'd probably throw a limiter on the end of, or not a podcast, well, a podcast or a YouTube video, you might throw a limiter on the end just in case any of the stuff that you're doing possibly can be louder. So if we wanted to make this louder.
Began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, a wisest and fairest of all of the beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls.
So this allows you to make it louder, so you can actually record softer, record normal, and then you can record it so that when you hit play in YouTube, you've got a vocal or a voice track that is hitting around 0, right? Is hitting around what people are expecting, the loudness of it, without having to deal with trying to overcompress it. So a limiter is a compressor, but it basically stops something from going above a specific amount, right? So just pick an amount. You know, in a mastering situation, it would be -2 because that's the industry standard. But it could be -1 or whatever, and then you just put that, and then you move it up. So we could increase this by 17 decibels and just shave off the peaks, and that would be good. And you'd be able to listen to it and see. And then you could go back and change some stuff by going, well, how does this change the way it sounds and whatever. But what we did is we used an equalizer, we used a compressor, we used a gate, and then the limiter at the very end is just a safety mechanism. A lot of programs that, a lot of video programs have limiters built in, and you can just use those. But all of these things can be accomplished in Final Cut Pro or Premiere or any of these things because they're just basic things. Okay. And that's it. That's what you do. It really, most of your work is spent picking the microphone and placing the microphone. And once you get to that and clever placement, figuring all that stuff out, then you just do some very, very light lifting. I didn't do crazy EQ stuff here. Not crazy. Like when you see like people on YouTube and they're like, this is my EQ, and it's like, there's like these huge dips and peaks everywhere and it looks like a porcupine, right? It's like, that's too much. That means you either pick the wrong microphone or you're just doing like, you can go down a rabbit hole. Like you're like, well, what if I do this? And then you do it and you're like, oh, okay, that sounds better. And then maybe it doesn't and whatever. Go for natural. We're not trying to make a pop record. We're trying to do a voice track. We want people to listen to you as if you're in the room. That's the aesthetic. That's the aesthetic I just taught you. If you want to do something different, that's cool too, right? But then you're going to get into more plugins and things like that. But the aesthetic to me personally would be natural. Okay? Notice we didn't have to worry about plosives because he's so far away. from the capsule. We didn't need one of these. But if you were using this microphone, which doesn't have a good one, you would put this in front of it. You want to be about this far away from your microphone, okay? Because that prevents, if you prevent proximity effect, then you don't have to deal with it in here, right? If you're preventing it from the get-go. So just be away from the microphone. All right, so we have 10 minutes. It almost happened. 10 minutes, okay? 10 minutes for questions. All right, let's start with you.
So recently received as a gift and I don't think it's at this level, but a Yeti X. And I wasn't sure if that was the proper kind of mic based on these prior conversations and like what it actually fell into in terms of dynamic versus compressor. Because I probably do have a more bright voice, and my intention here is to not over-highlight the brightness.
Mm-hmm.
So wasn't sure if that would be recommended as an entry-level mic, or if I should just keep looking around. Obviously, I need to still get the height of the pop filter.
Right. So what she asked whether a Blue Yeti X, where that falls. Now, from what I understand, a Blue Yeti X is a microphone, right?
This microphone is
A USB. It has a USB connector that goes in your computer. So what the microphone is it's basically a preamp that you use as an audio interface. Okay. So you can use the compressors and the EQs. That doesn't have anything to do with that. If you have a microphone that it probably is bright because it's a modern condenser microphone, so it's probably bright. What you can do to make them less bright is, in general, all condenser microphones, especially cardioid condensers, which is what a Blue Yeti is, they will be bright when they're right in front. But as you go around the microphone, you will actually see in the polar plot, you will see that it starts to decay the higher frequencies. And so what you can do very simply is, instead of talking directly into it, you could point it at your chin and talk above it, because this would be off axis. Or you could put it above yourself and do that, right? The reason they do this is so they can read the script. That's why that would be there, right? Or if you want it in front, like if you're doing a podcast and you want it to be in front, you can just turn it a little bit. And as you turn it, so like this. So it's all about talking into the microphone off axis, and that will make your voice darker.
Perfect, yeah. It's actually one of those desk mics anyway, so I think that actually works really well.
Right, and you just twist it a little bit, and no one will notice, and it will, and then the pop filter will help. The pop filter will cut a little bit of the highs out, but in general, it's just turn the microphone a little bit. I have one question back there first.
How does portability play into this?
Portability.
It seems like I want to record video essays, but I see myself every time thinking and speaking if I was walking on a treadmill while talking to a microphone.
Okay. So for portability, I would buy something like a Zoom. Okay, that works. I would get whatever their 32-bit one is. Is it H1 32-bit? Maybe not. I don't know. They have a cheap like single microphone preamp one that's 32-bit. The reason I say that is because then you don't have to worry about your volume. You basically can't you can overload it, because I did that, but you're not supposed to be able to overload it. And that way you don't have to worry about your volume. That would be real big help if you're going to be walking around. And then what I would do is I would use something that, again, like you might want to go with the cardioid, because if you're going to be on a treadmill or something where you're walking, you're going to be moving, and you don't want your voice to go in and out of the pickup range of that. For you might actually want like a lavalier microphone. Problem with the lavalier microphones are, if you do a lot of movement, it'll start to rub up against your clothing and make noise. So, but yeah, maybe a condenser that's on whatever I don't know if you're talking and like you're filming yourself via like with I don't know how people do it, but like however you're filming yourself, maybe you put the microphone on that, and that may help. But I would definitely get a recorder that does 32-bit now, because then you don't have to worry about levels. You can just turn it on, turn whatever power it needs. It runs off a battery, and just go. Like you could use a USB battery. Does that answer your question? Because then afterwards you would do all this stuff. Like you'd bring it home, you'd import all your stuff, and then you'd work on editing and all of that later. So you wouldn't do it while you were recording. Okay, for you first.
So I was just thinking of something that might help the room. Whenever I'm doing recordings, I typically like to do a side address on my shotgun. So that way I'm cutting across pickup field.
Okay. Okay, so what he mentioned as sort of a thought to the room is when he does his stuff, he's actually speaking into the side of the shotgun microphone in order to cut out what's happening on the other side. And I would say that's fine, but you'd have to worry about whatever's in front of it because it's going to be real loud. So in general, the shotgun is going to be, because it's going to, like if you can put it above you or below you, you're kind of cutting that stuff out and you're just hitting your voice. Like think of your voice as your mouth is like a bell on an instrument and you're just pointing it towards that and everything else will get away. So you might not necessarily do this, but you might do that because you're not going to get a lot of stuff from your ceiling. You might not get a lot of stuff from your floor, but it does work. You just have to be careful about what is ever in front of that microphone. Okay, we have a question back there. No, you, go ahead.
I apologize, I came in late, I apologize if you answered this already, but that Equitech that you got there on the table, is that the new one or the old one, and which do you like better?
It's the old one, the new one is trash.
Really? Tell me more.
Okay, well, not the new one, the new one. Like I think they made like a new one that just came out. And I don't know about that one because I've never heard it. But the ones that have so this is the old one that has the circle badge. The circle badge is fantastic. It's flat, it's loud, it's really interesting sounding. It's not, it's transparent, but it's also got a little bit of mojo to it. But the new ones are super, 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 super bright. Like they're super bright. And they have an Equitech 100S, which is decent, but it is really bright. So like you have to know that that's what you want. Like you really got to go, yeah, I want a bright microphone. But yeah, I like the old ones. Real quick before I answer another question, that QR code is supposed to go to my Twitter. So if you have questions that you want to ask and you think topics that you want me to talk about, do it. And I will feed my content and I will make content for everyone. All right. Again, those are the other shows that I'm going to be at or I'm going to do here. Other things, please come. Don't go yet. We have 4 minutes. Okay. Question. Yeah.
So I've got a podcast to do in my basement. I put blankets on the walls, everything. But there's 3 or 4 of us in the room. What style of microphone do you think I should use, and what can I do to try to minimize hearing my co-host voice on my mic?
Right. Okay. So he asked, he's got a podcast set up. He's got multiple people in his basement and he's hearing the co-hosts in his microphone. So I would recommend one of 2 microphones. I would recommend a hypercardioid microphone. Okay. So an SM7B will cut out pretty much everybody else, including an RE20 if you wanted. They have different sounds. Unless you're filming it. If you're filming it, then I would say get shotgun microphones because then it looks cooler. But unless you want that whole, I'm sitting in a lounge chair with my SM7B or whatever, that's a thing, I guess, when I see it on YouTube. But I would use an SM7B or something of that ilk. There may be others out there that are cheaper. You would need 3 of them, 3 or 4. You would need 1 for every host. And then you would position each other so you can see each other, but that everybody is somewhat pointing into someone else's blind spot. So
What I do is I try to have 3-4 tables and in a diamond formation.
Right.
Where we support each other.
Right. So you would have one SM7B here that is blocking, or maybe here that's blocking the dude over there, or maybe you do it like this so it blocks these people and their mics are sort of blocking you, and you just got to play around until you get the less. And then when you start using gates, then you'll really be able to isolate it. but that'll help. You always play with the null zones. All right, another question. Did you have a question before? Oh, okay.
I was just wondering in terms of use of like isolation boost. So
Yes.
So like using the chaotic eyeball, I noticed that it picks up a lot. It just it's more, I guess, less sensitive to certain things. You know, when I have a sound, so it's natural.
Right.
And I feel like it dampens the sound a lot more than I want. So is there a suggestion for?
Right. Okay. So she's using, I can't remember the full name of it, but it's called the eyeball, and it's basically a big foam doodle that you put the microphone in, right, and you talk into it. And the problem with those is they tend to sound like the microphone is in a foam ball. That's because it's in a foam ball, right? It's like the box thing. So what I would recommend doing is I would recommend taking out of the ball, okay? And then either purchasing a portable vocal booth, which is basically bass traps that are on a hinge. They're not expensive. They're like, well, I won't say that they're not expensive because who knows what is expensive. But basically, they are bass traps that are on a hinge. And basically, you put the microphone, well, you put one behind you, and then you put the microphone in the crook between the two bass traps, and that leaves it to be a lot more open, but it's still eliminating the reflections that you're trying to eliminate. That trend of putting microphones in boxes happened in like 2018 or something, and it was for people who were doing stuff in their hotel rooms when they were like in, Beirut or something, and they were, trying to do news. And so people kind of felt like it was, they sort of said, well, it's okay. They're in a hotel room. It's fine, right? Then we start using it for singing and for other things. And now we're kind of like, but now it sounds like it's in a box. So I would take it out. And until then, you could use a closet, right? What you do is you stick yourself in the closet and you point the microphone at you, and then maybe erect something like it would be even stupid if you had a couch in the room. All you had to do is turn the couch up and put it behind the microphone, and that would work too. And just talk that way, because really what's happening is the reflections are coming in from the other side.
I use a reflective shield.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So if you use the reflective shield in behind it, and then you put yourself in the closet and sort of go back and forth until you get just the right sound, that will work. Okay. Absolutely. Yes.
I mean, we're basically out of time. Super quick.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you could use a frequency, like you could watch a spectrogram if you really want. But is it that you don't know what the term means? Or do you not have, so you don't have a disability necessarily? You don't have a disability though. Okay, so you're not, okay. So what I would do is I would find things that were arguably bright. Like everybody says that's bright, and I would listen to it. So, oh, now I sound like a real idiot. What's the Wailers, the reggae, Bob Marley and the Wailers. Listen to Bob Marley and Wailers. Super bright, like off the charts bright music. Okay, and you will actually hear like just the sizzliness of the voices. And I would listen to what people consider bright. Well, yes, there is a tool. It's called a spectrogram, and what it does is you can feed an audio signal into it, and it will actually show you in like bright orange colors where in the frequency spectrum most of the energy lies. The only problem is finding one that is cheap, but or that is free. But if you find one of those, you definitely can visualize it.
I'm stuck at the point of like I can sense it, but then how do I adjust it? Is where I'm kind of like that connection is not.
Okay. Uh-huh. Yeah, absolutely. It's just a lot of listening. But yeah, you could use a spectrogram and just put that as a plug-in in your DAW, or you can just feed it a thing and it will show you what is in those ranges. And then after this, then you would put an EQ on top of that, and you would start altering it, and you could see how it changed. Yeah. Cool. All right, everyone, I have to pack up. Thank you very much. Please come to the other ones. If you come early to the other ones, you can ask me more questions about this stuff.